Hey y'all, it's Jennifer. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am coming to you with another weekly reading vlog. So I have not done a weekly reading vlog so far this month, and I'm really disappointed in myself about that because I really wanted to make sure that I was chronicling Ancients-a-thon. But I have to say, for the past week, I haven't read anything. My reading has just been totally and completely off the rails, and I have been very, very stressed out. And so I have essentially been reading one book for the past 2 or 3 weeks, and that's fine. That's actually okay. It's not very conducive to a readathon. Apparently I need to do a bit of mood reading, and I would like to start a fantasy book this weekend, but I don't know whether or not that will happen, and I'm not quite sure what I would pick if I did, but I will tell you what I'm currently in the middle of. I'm hoping to finish today, maybe, The Idiot by Fyodor Dostoyevsky. I have been really, really loving this, and I have been reading it for 2 weeks, like I said. And typically for me, if I have been reading a book for over about a week, unless it's a really massive book that I intended to take my time with, or I'm buddy reading it with someone, if I am in a book for more than a week, if I have been reading a book for more than a week, I tend to think that I must not really be enjoying it, or there's something wrong with it, or even if I'm enjoying it, I just want to get it over with, and I'm ready to move on to something new. So I'll tend to kind of go through the second half of the book a little bit faster than I did the first half. And I'm pleased to say that I haven't done that here. I have really just been enjoying taking my time with this, and maybe that's a facet of how the book is written. Maybe that's just a facet of Dostoyevsky's writing, but I just think this is absolutely amazing. It is such an exquisite book. I have maybe 150 pages left. I don't really feel like anything is going to happen in that amount of time that will make me dock a star off of it. So I really feel like I'm probably going to give this one 5 stars. This is my first Dostoyevsky. I did start The Brothers Karamazov last year, and I intended to read it earlier this year, but I really didn't like the translation I had. So I just stopped, and I didn't necessarily hold it against Dostoyevsky. I didn't really think it was him I didn't like. I knew it was the translation. And so I decided to start with The Idiot, and I'm really, really glad that I did. This is the Wordsworth's Classic Edition, and I have decided to get all of Dostoyevsky in this edition because they are so cheap. They are so affordable. And I also thought it might be nice for my first read of him to read everything he wrote in the same translation. So I believe all of the Wordsworth classics are translated by Constance Garnett. I know a lot of people have their problems with her. And I initially thought that I probably had a problem with her last year when I read Anna Karenina, but I haven't really had any complaints with this so far. The book is also just wonderfully floppy, and to me, that's a little bit more important than the translation. That's the honest truth. I want a book that feels good to read physically, and that's really more important to me than translation at this point. And so I know I love how the Wordsworth classics are formatted. I really like their text. It's always very clear. Even if it is a little bit small sometimes, it is always very clear. And so I am really excited to continue in my journey with Dostoyevsky, and I'm really excited to finish this out. I actually know how it's going to end because I did read the introduction to this, which I know I shouldn't have done, but it has not ruined the book for me at all. In fact, it has made me really excited to get to the ending and to see it happen. So I have just really, really loved this, loved this, loved this. In terms of Ancients-a-thon, I have read all of my plays and I have read all of my nonfiction picks, and so I'm really, really happy about that. But it's time to focus on the group read, which is The Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan. And I am maybe 50 pages into this. It's a relatively short classic, and it's actually a relatively easy read for something that is written during this period. This is a classic from the 1600s, and I have to say that's typically a time period that I really struggle with. I really, really think that things written at that time are very hard for me to understand. Weirdly enough, if it was written in the 1500s or the very early 1600s, I don't typically have a problem with it. But late 1600s into the 1700s, it's like people started thinking, I've got to make everything dense. I've got to make everything wordy. I've got to make it really descriptive and use these run-on sentences. And I'm happy to report that so far there hasn't been very much of that here in the Pilgrim's Progress. But I have been listening to this off and on, and I don't necessarily think that's been the best choice. It is an allegory. If you don't know what the Pilgrim's Progress is, it is an allegory, and it's a very heavy-handed allegory. You know exactly what everything stands in for because he tells you. This person is called Sloth, so you might can imagine they're lazy. And so he's very heavy-handed with the allegory, which I think has made this stand the test of time because I know that it's very popular as a children's classic now. And for centuries it has been. It's been something that you would read to children, which I think is fascinating, but I actually find it a little bit difficult to understand when I'm listening to the audiobook of it. So maybe listening to it has not been the best choice, but sometimes I listen to it and read along, so I would really like to get farther into this week. I'm also currently listening to A Hero for Our Time by Mikhail Lermontov, and I am reading this basically because everyone recommended this to me. When I said that I enjoyed Yevgeny Onegin by Alexander Pushkin, everyone said, stop what you're doing and pick up Lermontov. And so I am listening to this on audiobook, and I am predictably really enjoying it. You were all right. This is a really, really fun, brilliant read, and it feels very Byronic. I think that's what it's going for. And so there's a lot of charm, there's a lot of wit, there's a lot of humor here. And it's also really, really beautiful in its descriptions of landscape, which makes it feel very romantic in nature as well. And so I'm really fascinated by this. I knew nothing about it. So I just decided to kind of listen to it on a whim after multiple of you guys recommended it to me. And so I don't actually know where it's going. This is written as a diary of a soldier who's maybe not the best person, but is kind of cheekily called a hero of our time, which is the title of the book. But this is a very short read that I predict I will probably finish in the next couple of days. It is, I'm going to tell you, it is the 6th Russian classic that I have read in the past month. And I am just loving it. Absolutely loving it. I have loved everything that I have read that has been Russian in the past few weeks. And so I'm really, really thrilled about this. And maybe I'll make a video wrapping up all of my Russian reading in a couple of weeks, because I might just stay on this trend. I might just keep on reading Russian classics. You never know. Something that is up on the docket for me is the Foresight Saga, which I am currently buddy reading with Orion from Book Zealots. And I am also about to start a buddy read of A Place of Greater Safety by Hilary Mantel. I just cannot wait to start this. I'm reading this with Tanya from Bookish Topics. I will link to her channel and Orion's down below. And we're going to take this very, very slowly. And I'm so happy about it because I just want to be drenched in Hilary Mantel's language. So this is a historical fiction about the Reign of Terror. And it is following Robespierre, Danton, and somebody who I'm frankly not all that familiar with, and that's Camille Desmoulins. So I have never really known very much about Camille Desmoulins, but that's him. You can see he's a really handsome fella by his jawline. When I saw his jaw, I said, now who is that? I don't recall any of the leaders of the French Revolution being that handsome. And then I found out it was Camille Desmoulins. So I'm really excited to start reading this because I'm in a very French mood. I'm in a very French revolutionary mood in particular. So I am looking forward to trying this. I hope that Tanya likes it. I don't think she's read any Hilary Mantel. And so I am looking forward to starting this and also to carrying on with the Foresight Saga. I'm not very far into that. So it does feel like that's probably the book that I should focus on this weekend. But I have to say this weekend, I'm probably not going to get very much reading done. So tomorrow, I thought I would carry you along. We're going to go to the State Art Museum because they have an exhibit on currently that is about mummies. So they're calling the exhibit the Golden Mummies, and so I'm assuming that their sarcophaguses are going to be absolutely incredible. So I am really, really looking forward to seeing this exhibit. They are not ancient Egyptian mummies? They are. They're from Egypt, but they're more from the Greek period, the Ptolemaic period, and the Roman period, that kind of late BC, early AD period. I think the thing with these kind of Greek or Ptolemaic age mummies is that they didn't actually mummify them in the same way that they did previously. So I don't believe any of the organs are taken out and put in the canopic jars, if you know anything about mummification. I used to be obsessed with ancient Egypt, so I know far more about it than I probably should. So I am really, really looking forward to this. I don't know that I'm going to be able to get any footage of anything. I would really love to get footage of the sarcophaguses, because I think they're going to be absolutely beautiful. And I don't know if anything else has come with them, any pottery, anything that they were buried with. It's interesting to me to think of Roman era mummies, because we think of mummification as such an ancient process, as like 3,000, 4,000 years ago in Egypt. And yet it is something that carried on into the Roman occupation of Egypt and during Cleopatra's reign, certainly. So Cleopatra is probably a good time period comparison for what we will be seeing tomorrow. So I believe the mummies are going to be from around the age in which she was living, which will be really fascinating. But I have never been to the State Art Museum, and so we are also going to go on a tour of their Italian collection. You knew it. I am who I am. We can't go to a museum without seeing something from the Italian Renaissance, am I right? And so I know for a fact we have a triptych by Giotto. Jotto is one of my favorite artists of all time, but he's really from the late medieval period, and he was friends with Dante. And so I know that this is the only complete triptych, if I'm not mistaken, outside of Italy that was done by Giotto in his workshop. And so I'm really pumped about that. I'm also really pumped because apparently the State Art Museum has a Botticelli. I had no clue a Botticelli work was this close to me. And so I am so excited to see that. I'm not sure what it is. I'm sure it's a much lesser known Botticelli, and maybe it's a sketch, frankly. It might just be something that he sketched. It doesn't matter. It's by Botticelli. He's my favorite Renaissance artist. And so I'm really excited to see that. And I know too, I think we probably have some Titian, which would be really exciting. Titian was very prolific, so it wouldn't shock me if we had a bit of Titian. But I thought y'all might enjoy coming to the art museum with me. Hopefully I can get footage there. But over the weekend, I will be having a family get together and everything, so I'm going to basically be out of town the entire weekend, and I don't expect that during that time I will do very much reading, so we'll see. I do think I might carry something with me, but it's probably going to be a fantasy. It's going to be something very light. So I will check in with you later, probably tomorrow at the museum. home now from the museum, but I definitely had to have a little book haul. I bought a book at the museum, and that is When Women Ruled the World by Kara Cooney. This is a nonfiction book about 6 queens of Egypt. So I think 6 female pharaohs, which is really interesting. I had heard of half of them I had not heard of. So I'm really, really excited about this one. But I also went to Barnes & Noble, and if you have not seen their new line of classics, oh my gosh, you're just going to lose it. They're so cheap as well. Really, really beautiful, but they're also so cheap. So I got a new edition of Mansfield Park because I am reading that for Jane Austen July this year, and I am just really excited to have an edition that I can annotate because I would like to do a couple of videos on it this year. And the other edition I have is so small, it's actually almost unreadable for me. So I decided to get another physical copy, and this one is just absolutely beautiful. I also picked up this copy of Dracula. I know. I always say that I struggled with Dracula, but I just feel like in my heart I should have loved it. So I really, really want to take a chance on it. I want to read it again, and I think that I would like to annotate it as well. I just feel like Dracula should work for me. I'm not quite sure why it doesn't. So I am definitely going to read it this time. I'm going to make sure that I read it all the way to the end. And if I don't like it this time, I just don't like it. So this is going to be 3rd time's the charm for me with Dracula. Last but not least, I of course got Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. But this is the 1831 edition, and I only have the 1818 edition. So I'm really excited to read the 1818 edition of Frankenstein and this 1831 edition and do a comparison side by side. I've wanted to do a video on that for a very long time. So I'm very excited about that. I'm not quite sure when I'll do it, but it feels pertinent to me to read one and then automatically read the other. It feels like it's something that should be done right back to back so that I don't forget anything, because I know there are going to be major changes between them. So we are back from the museum. It's actually been about a week since I last spoke to you. It's been about a week since we went to the museum. The past week has been very, very stressful. And so not a whole lot of reading got done. And essentially after we went to the museum, after we had our little family gathering, not much progress has been made on anything. I did wind up carrying a fantasy book with me when we went down to the museum, and that is Half Sick of Shadows by Laura Sebastian. The biggest shock to me actually is that I did wind up finishing this today. And so I took this really slowly. It did take me a week to finish, mostly because there were days I didn't read anything, and there were times when I just didn't really have time to read, but this is an Arthurian legend retelling from the perspective of the Lady of Shalott, and it is absolutely brilliant. I thought I was probably taking a pretty big chance here and that I likely would not get on with this, but I had semi-high hopes because I've read Laura Sebastian before and really, really enjoyed her. And luckily, I really, really enjoyed this. I'm gonna give this very high praise. This might now be my favorite Arthurian legend retelling. I know, I'm very, very hard on them, as I've said before, and by all the metrics that I measure whether or not I enjoy an Arthurian legend retelling, this one hit all of the marks for me, and it hit a lot of marks I didn't even know that I wanted in an Arthurian legend retelling. So the Lady of Shalott, Elaine, she is an oracle, and so she has the ability to kind of see into the future. So this book is structured in a really interesting way. It's told in first person, but some parts of it are her kind of looking back on her childhood. So that's, I did this, I said this, we went here. And then there's kind of the present day where they're trying to get Arthur onto the throne, which is, I'm doing this, we're doing this, we're going here. And then there are the portions of the book that are actually her visions of what the future might turn out to be. And that's, I will do this, Arthur will do this, Morgana will do this. And so you kind of have to get adjusted to that so that you know when you're in a certain time period in the story. And it's just absolutely brilliant. So throughout this book, there is a real undertone of melancholy, which I really like. Not sadness, so to speak, but melancholy, because Elaine understands where this is going. And it's assumed that you as the reader probably also know where this is going. This is probably not your first Arthurian legend retelling. And so you, alongside Elaine, know how this story is gonna go. You know how Arthur's story ends, and you know in broad strokes what happens to many of the characters. So there's a real undertone of melancholy to it where Elaine fights with the fact that she doesn't know whether or not certain things are set in stone. And I just really love that tone. Like I said, not sadness, not overt depression or sadness, just kind of melancholy. And I really vibe with the tone of melancholy anyway. Some of my favorite songs of all time, I would call melancholy. Some of my favorite television series, movies, they all work with this a kind of undertone of melancholy. And I would say most recently, something that did this very, very well was WandaVision. If you watched WandaVision, the Marvel show, because at the beginning, you see that everything appears right on the surface, but you know, you as the viewer know, something's not right. And as the show progresses, that feeling of wrongness really, really grows, and you almost want her to get away with what she's doing throughout the process of WandaVision, because you know things would be happier like that for her and Vision, but you know it can't stay like that. And so throughout WandaVision, it's not only her coming to terms with what needs to happen, but you as the viewer know things can't stay the same. Things are really going to change, and it's going to be very, very sad towards the end. But I think that the show really handled that tone very well, and I think that's what made it successful. So that's kind of what's present here, is knowing that what's going on right now is not always going to stay the same. And we're not always going to be friends. We're not always going to like each other. Lancelot is handled so wonderfully here. Lancelot is my favorite in the Arthurian legend. Guinevere, I had my problems with, but I found that in general, I apparently just have problems with Guinevere. I've always thought that I really, really liked her, because I have liked her in certain adaptations and in a couple of books, I really have. But I kind of think the kind of flighty, indecisive, selfish Guinevere is probably truer to the original, is probably very true to what Guinevere actually is. And I don't really like that anymore. And I wonder if younger Jenny, teenage Jenny, really vibed with Guinevere, because I was also kind of an angsty teenager who was probably very selfish. And so now that I'm older, is Guinevere just not a character who connects to me anymore? I don't know, but I still feel the same real connection with Lancelot, and I loved everything to do with Lancelot in this book. I loved Elaine as a character, I loved Arthur, I loved Morgana. I think that she got all of these characters right, and I think she did the tropes so well. Some of the big things that you really expect to see with an Arthurian legend were done beautifully here. So I gave this 5 stars. I'm really, really happy with it, and I'm actually in the end very happy that I was able to take my time with it. For the most part, the reading that I have been able to get done in the past week has been done via audiobook. That's basically what I've been able to focus on. That's what I've had time to do. But sometimes with audiobooks, such as in the case of The Pilgrim's Progress, which I have made incredible headway into, I don't really have much memory of this. I've read quite a bit of it, but I honestly don't remember anything that was covered. And I don't know if that's me, if that's by dint of the fact that I have been a kind of high-strung over the past week. But the thing with audiobooks for me is that I have to be doing something when I'm listening to them. But on the other hand, if I'm doing something while listening to them, am I really paying attention to the audiobook sometimes? And I think Pilgrim's Progress is a very weirdly formatted book, and you can see that when you see it written on the page. There's all these little notes. It's half written as a play where certain characters will talk. You don't know when it shifts from one character talking to the narrator saying something to another character speaking, because there are no quotation marks. Half of it's in italics, and you're thinking, why? Why was that in italics? And thus, in the audiobook, none of that transitions. And so, on the one hand, you would think maybe the audiobook clarifies some of those things, and maybe it does, but for the most part, I've found it a very confusing experience, and frankly, I haven't enjoyed it. I just found it very heavy-handed. I really had my problems with this. In fact, looking back, I've always thought that I read this before. I honestly don't think I have, because I remembered none of this. So either the first time I read it, it also didn't stick with me, or I just had never read it before. I respect what this was doing. Completely. I completely respect what this was doing, and I think it was successful in terms of the allegory, but it did not work well for me as a reader at all. And so this was a bit of a disappointment to me. At any rate, I'll be curious to hear what others thought about this who were reading this month for Ancients-a-thon, because I really struggled with it. I also finished A Hero of Our Time, and I probably should have mentioned that first, because I think immediately after filming that first clip, I finished that audiobook. I barely had an hour left. And so I really enjoyed this, but I'm going to save my thoughts for a kind of Russian-themed wrap-up. But I did finish that. But my current audiobook read is The French Revolution from Enlightenment to Tyranny by Ian Davidson. I have had this book on my shelf for a long time, since the last time I went to Paris, which was actually 3 years ago, because I got this at the Great Shakespeare and Company. But being in Paris, which was the seat of so much of the French Revolution, I think I read something somewhere that made me think I would probably need a refresher course on the French Revolution at some point. And so this is the book I picked up. Little did I know I would need that refresher course 3 years from then. So I have been listening to this, and a refresher is exactly what I would call it. This is a great beginner's book for the French Revolution. Absolutely it is, because it doesn't give you very much detail at all. And I think that's probably for the best when you are just getting into the French Revolution, because so many different things happened. And a lot of things have oddly similar names, similar groups, groups where one thing differs them from another group. And so sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming, I think, to get into the French Revolution. And I think this is a very easy place to start. I think it makes it very understandable. I personally am thinking so far this is mainly just okay. I think I personally was looking for something a little bit more detailed than what I'm getting here, but it has been a very excellent refresher course. I really wanted to kind of go back over some of the main events of the French Revolution before I read that Hilary Mantel book. So I think this is going to really help me, and it is very fascinating. I find the French Revolution fascinating, and I find so many of the figures fascinating, and I would be curious to know how the French view some of these figures today, because it's just interesting how so many of them started very high and then fell very low. And so I would be interested to know kind of the current French opinion of men like Robespierre, like Saint-Just. I think that it would be very interesting to get a contemporary French perspective on this, because through my Napoleon project, I've been able to speak with a lot of French people about kind of contemporary opinions about Napoleon. A lot of people will talk to me about that, and I think that's fascinating because it seems like people are of two minds about Napoleon, and I would imagine it's the same way for some of the figures of the French Revolution, because that's definitely the way a lot of Americans feel about our founding fathers, of two minds. You know, people do great and terrible things. And I think in the French Revolution, the lines are really blurred in some cases. So I just have found this to be really interesting. Audiobooks have been mainly what I've been capable of focusing on the past week in terms of reading. And since that has been the case, I've not made it very far in the Foresight Saga. I think I might try this on audiobook, actually. And so maybe I will really like this on audiobook. Otherwise, I am way far behind on this. I'm enjoying this so far. There are a lot of names thrown at you, and I feel the need to kind of draw out a family tree. Maybe that would help me. But I kind of thought if I gave in and did this on audiobook that I would be more confused than if I read it physically. But audio may be what I have time to do in the coming weeks. So I think I'm probably gonna have to transition to listening to this on audiobook. So that also means I didn't actually finish The Idiot by Dostoyevsky. I do have this in my bag, so essentially if I go anywhere, like on my lunch break, I have a book to read. And so I only have a little under 100 pages left to go, I think, so this will definitely be knocked out in the next few days. Well, I actually thought I got little to no reading done this past week, but when I look at this pile, I'm very, very proud. 90% of it was done on audiobook, and I'm happy with that. The only thing I'm really disappointed by is the Pilgrim's Progress, and I don't think I would have liked that had I read that all physically, so I'm not going to blame that totally on the audiobook experience. I'll blame it also on my state of mind. I have been very high-strung for the past week. We have some family things going on that has been at the forefront of my mind, and that really kind of causes my focus to go. And so audiobooks have been the way to go. And so I'm not quite sure what the rest of the month looks like. I'm not really sure what July will look like. But hopefully, if I have to stick with audiobooks, I continue to pick up really great ones. I have been so happy with audiobook reading for the past month. But to talk about something that has nothing to do with reading, I thought it might be fun to go over some of my favorite pieces that I saw in the art museum this past weekend. So I showed you all of my favorites, I think, but one of my favorites was definitely the Jotto Altarpiece. So I mistakenly believed it was a triptych before we went. I think I told you it was a medieval triptych, but this is truly an altarpiece. So this is a 5-paneled work. A triptych would be 3-paneled, and it would probably be more ornate than what this was. This is actually called the Perutzi Altarpiece, so it was probably commissioned by the Perutzi family. You might be familiar with them if you are at all into kind of Florentine history or Renaissance Florence. The Perutzi are a fairly famous name, I would say, but they have their own chapel in Santa Croce. And the Perutzi chapel is frescoed by Giotto. Some of the most famous Giotto frescoes are done in Santa Croce in the Perutzi chapel. There might also be some in the Pozzi chapel, if I'm not mistaken. But it's thought that this altarpiece was probably in their family chapel in Santa Croce. It is actually the only complete altarpiece done by Giotto and his workshop outside of Italy, so I'm not quite sure how it wound up over here, but it's really, really beautiful. I love Giotto. Giotto was working in the late 1200s, early 1300s, and a lot of what he was doing was paving the way for the Italian Renaissance. So his figures here will seem a little bit flatter to you than Botticelli, who we can look at next, but they are definitely more vibrant and lifelike than things that were painted earlier in the medieval period, or by any of his contemporaries, actually. Giotto was really, really revolutionary. But this altarpiece was done probably between 1310 and 1315, and it wasn't done wholly by Giotto. So other members of his workshop definitely contributed to this. It is done in tempera and gold leaf on panel, and tempera is where you mix egg yolk with a pigment. And the thing with tempera, the thing that made it kind of fall out of fashion in the Renaissance, because most of the Renaissance paintings that you think of are done in oil, tempera done with that egg yolk flakes quite a bit, but it was still used pretty widely because it does offer you a really interesting color combo. This was definitely the star of the show to me, so I'm just so thrilled that I got to see it. But to me, the star of the show, personally to me, there was a Botticelli that was positioned right behind Giotto on the next wall. This is just called the Adoration of the Child. It was done around 1500, so much later in Botticelli's career. Botticelli died in 1510, so this is later in his career. And he really, really loved anything with the Madonna and Child. That was kind of a favorite subject for him. He painted it many, many times, and he always liked to paint them like this in tondo. And so tondo just means round. And there's something about things done in tondo that I really, really like. One of my favorite paintings done by Michelangelo, which is in the Uffizi, is done in tondo, and I really, really love it. There's something about it being circular. I guess it feels very different. It feels pretty unique, but this is also done in tempera on panel. So tempera did not fully go out of fashion. It was still used by some people, and Botticelli favored it. This is just exquisite. I think everything Botticelli did was amazing. And this is certainly not on the par with some of his other kind of Madonna and Child or Adoration pieces, but it's still really beautiful. I just think he has a gift with fabric. There's something to the way that he does, like their crowns, their rays, some of their robes. It really does feel like he can paint things and make you believe they are transparent or that they really folded over a body in a realistic way. He just had a gift to me. Some people think Botticelli was guilty of putting the same face in every portrait because he did have kind of a favorite model, Simonetta Vespucci. Her face shows up in most of his paintings, actually. I really like her face, so that's never really bothered me that she kind of shows up throughout his work. So I really, really love her look. And this was, of course, the highlight of the trip to me. Other than the mummies, this was the highlight of the trip. Another of my favorite things we saw was a portrait of Louis XV. Now, this is just amazing, first of all. Love it. Rococo, Baroque excellence. I mean, this is just incredible. But this was done by an artist I had never heard of, Hyacinthe Rigaud. And this was done around 1715, I think. And if you don't know anything about Louis XV, he succeeded Louis XIV onto the throne extremely young. So he was pretty much a child when he ascended to the throne. And so this portrait is not only a really beautiful portrait of him as a royal, but it's also a bit of a propaganda piece, I would think. So you can see the way he's positioned, the way his feet are. He's definitely in a position of power. He's kind of saying, yeah, I'm a kid, but I'm also the King of France, so don't mess with me. And I think this was one of the most beautiful portraits in the museum. I mean, absolutely beautiful. Well, I think I will wrap up the blog here, so that's going to be all from me today. I would love to know how your reading has been going. I would love to know if you've been to an art museum lately, or if you've been interested in going to an art museum lately. But that's going to be all for me today. I hope you're all having a great week. Happy reading. Goodbye.